In June of 2016, Longmont author Sally McClain sat down with Channel 8 to talk about her book, Navajo Weapon, and about growing up in Longmont, Colorado.
He did send me an article. The men were being honored in Phoenix, Arizona in 1985, I believe. And I read the article, and it was interesting. It didn't really reveal a lot. It just said that they were code talkers, they were Marines, South Pacific. And truthfully, I put the article away and I didn't think much about it for months. And then one morning I woke up and I went, wait a minute, I was born in 1950. I was post-World War II generation. We knew a lot about World War II, far more than kids in school today do, because it was still a fresh wound. The trials at Nuremberg were going on. The trials against Tojo in Japan were going on. The war crimes. So I kept thinking, well, why aren't they in the history books? And I proceeded to go to the Boulder County Library and I started checking out every book on World War II and the South Pacific campaigns. I think I ended up reading over 116 books. And I found one brief mention. And I thought one of two things. This country has a habit of ignoring Native Americans and what they contribute to this country because they're kind of invisible. Or two, they just didn't care. And that really upset me. So that's what really set me on the path, was I wanted to know why they had been left out of the history books. And that's really the fuel that guided the journey, was I want to know. I want to know. I want to know the truth. And I want to know why they were excluded. And in the end, the reason for the exclusion was because they were not declassified until 1969. By then, all the World War II movies had been done, all the books had been written, and they had been left out. No one had knowledge of them. No one had access to them. So that became my goal, was to give them their rightful place, not only in American history, but World War II history and their own history, because their own people didn't really know what they had done during the war. And I made a point of making sure that the Navajo Nation and the rest of America would know the incredible, incredible gift these men created with that code and the hundreds of thousands of lives that they saved in the South Pacific because of it. So that was my main impetus of getting the story and getting it from them. And it took a long time to build that bridge of trust. Because here I was, this crazy white lady coming down to the reservation, asking them questions that they'd never been able or allowed to talk about. When they came home from the war, they were told, you will tell no one. You will not tell your mama, your grandma, your girlfriend, your wife. You will tell no one what you did during the war until we say you can. And the Marine Corps never said they could, not until 1970. And that was their first honors, was in 1970, 35 years after the war. So they waited a very long time, or 25 years after the war. 25 years after the war, they waited a very long time to have any kind of recognition. And listening to their stories, once they trusted me and understood that this was not my book, not my story. I just wanted to put down in writing what they did, what they experienced, what it was like to use their language to defeat a very powerful enemy. And I would just sit in absolute awe, listening to them recall the boot camp escapades, which I wish I could have put more in there because they were hilarious. Because it was such a foreign culture for them. To step into Marine Corps boot camp from the reservation, yeah, that was a whole different ball game. And even though they were reluctant to talk about their war experiences, what they gave me was so vivid. It was so moving. And in reality, they heard the battles more than they actually physically participated in them, because their role was to be on the radios. Their role was to pass those messages, get those messages out, get them straight, get them right. Make sure the artillery didn't hit their own men, make sure they hit the target, make sure the airstrikes were coordinated properly, without a mistake. And if you think about it, war is a horrible thing to begin with. And visually, it's gruesome. But it can be even more disturbing on some levels if all you do is hear it. You hear the screams, you hear the commands, you hear the men. You're desperate to help them. It's almost all audio, which can be very intense. So they didn't have the typical foxhole stories that most war veterans have, but their view, their angle on the war, and how they perceived it was so very interesting. It was amazing to me. Absolutely amazing. Mind-blowing. I would sit there and just go, I don't know how you did that. How do you stay on a radio knowing that everything around you is just erupting in chaos and you have to stay focused? You have to get that message through. It has to be right. It has to be correct. It has to be precise, and they did. They were able to almost cocoon themselves because of they were using their language. It acted like almost a protective bubble around them. They felt very protected and safe when they were on the radio, using their language to save the men, to get the target hit, to move the troops forward. So it was an utterly fascinating experience. I will treasure that time with them forever. I will honor them forever. It's so strange because when I started on this quest, and it really was a quest, I really just wanted to know the story. And at first I thought about just compiling the men's individual stories and like taking them to Kinko's and having them nicely printed and then giving them as a gift so that they could give it to their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, a record of their individual experiences. And I remember there was a meeting in Gallup. There were 5 code talkers in the room. And I was asking them just simple questions. How you were approached to join the Marine Corps. And one of the men was a member of the first 29, the first original Navajo code talkers, Dean Wilson. He looked at the other 4 code talkers and he sat back in his chair and he crossed his arms across his chest and everything stopped. And I went, uh-oh. Did I say something wrong? Did I ask an inappropriate question? And I looked at him and I said, Mr. Wilson, I said, have I offended you? And he went off on me. He railed at me for 5 minutes. Why aren't you writing this down? Why aren't you putting this down? Don't you know nobody knows what we did during the war? I mean, he literally went off on me for 5 minutes, and I was going, I would sell my soul for a piece of paper and a pen right now. And I apologized profusely, and that is when it hit me that their complete story, not their individual stories, needed to be told. Up to that point, I had no conscious thought in my mind, write a book? Are you kidding me? I was a working mother, a single working mother. I was working 45 hours a week. I had no journalism degree. I had no background per se in any of that could pertain to that field of expertise. And I thought, you guys are crazy. I don't know how to write a book. But I realized that I wouldn't be writing the book, I would be composing it. I would be putting all of the pieces together and tying them all in and making sense out of them. And my mother knew someone who had a publishing company in Boulder. It was Books Beyond Borders, and this was 1995. And I needed someone to professionally look at the body of work and give me an opinion and maybe some ideas about how to approach a publisher for the book. I gave it to her. Her name was Judy Ridlin. She read it. It must have been 2 weeks. And she called me back and she said, "This is incredible." And I said, "Really?" And I said, she said, "Oh, we love it." She said, "We're going to publish it." And I went, "You're going to what?" So they published it in 1994. Sorry, 1994. It was published for the first time. And that's, I guess that's the kind of quirk of these things. People ask me all the time, how did you come to this story? And there's no logical explanation for it. I'm sorry, there just isn't. Aside from the fact that my father was a World War II veteran, I had no contact with the Navajo. I didn't know much about them as a people. For me, it was a lesson that was placed on my path. From wherever it came from, whoever decided to put it on my path, and I simply picked it up and I ran with it. It was intriguing. It was fascinating. I wanted the truth. And other than that, there's no real logical explanation how I came to it. I often ask Carl Gorman, who was one of the first code talkers I ever came to know as a friend. And I said, "Carl, I'm sorry, I just don't understand this. Why me?" And he said, "Why not you?" And I said, "I don't have a journalism degree. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have..." And he said, he gave me a nickname. I really get emotional. He said, "Little one," he said, "for whatever reason, your life and the Navajo code talkers were destined to meet." He said, "Stop fighting it and just go with it." And after that, everything just fell into place. It's illogical. If I had 100 years to try to explain it, I couldn't. But that explanation is, suffice to say, is really what happened. And it was, next to having my daughter, it was the most incredible journey I've ever been on. I got my whole family involved. My sister Beth would go on trips with me down to the reservation, and my mom and Melinda, and it was an education I couldn't have paid for. We all got to learn about a way of life and a people that we had no knowledge of. And that was incredible. That was an incredible journey. I reminisce about it often and say, thank you, whoever gave me that little chunk on my life path. It was great. It really was. I did write a book about it. The Search for the Navajo Code Talkers actually explains the 6-year journey that I took to interview the men and bridge of understanding, and the document search through the archives, which, oh Lord. As far as I'm concerned, there should be a law passed that every person in this country is required to go to the National Archives once in their lifetime. Go to the index files, pick out a card at random, see what this country has saved. It's mind-blowing. And it belongs to us. It's our history. So the archives, finding information about the men through the archives was difficult because of the classified status of the men. And it took many hours digging through Marine Corps boxes and files and cross-indexing. And thank God the Marine Corps did that, because they cross-indexed everything related to the code talkers. So I could pick up a trail from one classified file that would lead me to another, that would lead me to 3 or 4 others, or 5 or 6 others, so I could follow the trail. And in that regard, it became easier once I deciphered their filing system. So, but the archives is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I mean, to a man, every one of them loved the Marine Corps. There's something special about the Marine Corps. And I'm not sure what it is, but the first time I met Carl Gorman, he was wearing a bright red t-shirt with gold lettering on it that said, "Marines never die, they just go to hell and regroup." And I looked at that and I went, it blew me away. Here's a Native American who for generations his people have been treated like crap in this country, abused beyond belief, and yet the Marine Corps gave them that validation inside that said, you are worth something. You are worthy. We respect you. We need you. We honor you. And I think that's why it became easy for Carl to become kind of the spokesman for the Code Talkers, because he was, number one, very eloquent. Number two, he was one of the first 29, one of the first Navajos recruited by the Marine Corps, and one of the first of the group to create the first code. So he had a lot of intimate knowledge about exactly what and how they created that military code based on a modified version of their language. So he was very open to speaking to schools, universities, anywhere that he was asked. He was much more open to it. The other Code Talkers, it took them a while to kind of warm up to that because they're a very modest people. One of the greatest, I guess you could say, sins for a Navajo to commit is to even appear to be bragging. You don't do it. You just don't do it. So the fine line that they had to walk between telling their story and not bragging was hard for some of them. They got more used to it once the book came out, and once their children and their grandchildren and the whole Navajo Nation understood the depth and the breadth of their service. Then it became more like, oh good, I can finally talk about this. This is what I did. I'm not bragging. A, B, C, D, this is what we did. Very cut and dried. And somewhat emotionless. But they had to walk that fine line because they didn't want to appear that they were better than anyone else who served during the war. And there were lots of Navajos that served in the Navy and the Army and all over. So they wanted to make sure that they didn't cross that line. And Carl was just always very comfortable. You know, he was a teacher, he was an artist, he was used to speaking to people, but he had some of the funniest stories. They were all hilarious. I wish I could have written a book just about the boot camp experiences. It probably would have been 400 pages long. Boot camp was a whole different world for them. But yeah, Carl became a really, really, really good friend to me and to my family. It was kind of like having an extra grandfather. He and his wife Mary and their daughter Zani and her 3 boys. It was like an extended family. It was wonderful. She basically speaks about her personal experience that she shared with her father. And he was able to share more of his war experiences with her on more a father-daughter level. And just knowing that she's out there, you know, and he's somewhere going, you go girl. I love seeing her. She posts on Facebook wherever she is, and I always write her a little note and say, you go girl. Just, you know, your papa's up there smiling, and it's, yeah, that was a very, very special relationship. And that's also how she honors him and the Code Talkers, by keeping, you know, what they did fresh in people's minds with personal touches and stories and things that he spoke of to her that he didn't tell me or anyone else, which is good. You know, people can relate to the father-daughter experience and know how wonderful that is to have a father that, wow, a World War II warrior, a Navajo code talker is like, whew, I mean, that's up there. So, yeah, she travels quite a bit at universities and groups. I still occasionally travel wherever I'm invited, universities, schools. Just ask me. I'll show up. I love talking about that. I could talk for 100 years about the code talkers. I never get tired of talking about the code talkers. So it's really wonderful that she's out there keeping those wonderful stories, fresh in people's minds so they don't forget. I didn't write the book for any personal gain or it's nice that people write the book because I do get a royalty and I appreciate those royalties. But knowing the Navajo people, getting to know the Navajo code talkers, getting to know their wives and their children, and knowing that the Navajo Nation is so proud of them. And I think I think it was the 40th anniversary of Ronald Reagan naming August 14th as Navajo Code Talkers Day. They had a big ceremony down at Window Rock. And I was invited down there. And it was really emotional to see a lot of the men because they're just, they're in their late 80s and 90s now. And the governor of Arizona was there, the Navajo president was there, and it was a really big deal, and it was beautiful and wonderful. And then all of a sudden they called out my name, and I went, what? They said, stand up, she's the one who wrote Navajo Weapon. And I went, oh. Okay, I was a little surprised and shocked, not because I expected it or anything. It's just it was extremely emotional that the Navajo Nation actually acknowledged the composition that I put together of Navajo Weapon. It was a really emotional day. But I get letters from Navajo children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews. I have lots of them on Facebook, and we keep in touch. And sometimes they'll call me and say, I'm doing a paper on such and such. Can I use part of this chapter? And I tell them, they can only use 1 or 2 paragraphs because, unfortunately, the copyright laws don't allow me to give permission for other than certain short paragraphs. And I tell them, as long as they properly cite what they use, they can use it. And they do. And then I always ask them, let me know what your grade was from your professor. And if you would like to, please send me a copy of your thesis or your paper. And I have many, many, many theses and papers from children of code talkers and that they send me, that they've done projects. And that to me is so rewarding. That they are keeping the story alive. The children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the nieces, the nephews, they keep it alive. That's so important. That's so rewarding to me. Because that's why I composed the book. Was for them to have that. That belongs to the Navajo Nation. Because that's their people, that's their language, that's their history. So, in that fact, it's been very rewarding to get emails and thesis papers and things like that. And they say, thank you so much, and this was great. I didn't know my great-grandfather very well, but hearing the stories, and his experiences, that's what's really, really rewarding. It's out there, and it's still going around, and they sell foreign rights to the book, which I'm really happy about, because most people in Europe don't know about the South Pacific conflict, which is understandable. They were trying to survive Hitler. They couldn't be worried about Tojo. They were trying to survive Hitler. So, but the one place that I would really like to see the book translated and printed is in Japan. because the Japanese people, like the Germans, were lied to. They were kept in the dark. Now, the Japanese have been lucky. They have not had a government that has gotten on the warmonger path. In that regard, I guess they did learn their lessons. But there's so much more that they don't know that they should. And I tried to be extremely impartial. The chapters that I describe on why Japan did what they did prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because I thought it was important for everyone to understand it didn't just start on December 7th. It started back in 1926. It went on they had that plan in their minds of executing that blueprint for a very, very long time, just like Hitler did. And people need to understand how easy it is to be fooled. That's why any country that suppresses newspapers, reporters, TVs, get out in the streets and scream bloody murder because they're trying to hide something. And those are the lessons. You can't afford. No one in this world can afford to be ignorant anymore. There's no excuse for it.
They came to the reservation and told us they needed the Navajo to help fight the enemy in a war very far from our home. The Navajo needed to walk in beauty and live in harmony. But America was at war, and we answered the call. Our language was our weapon, and from it we developed a code. The Japanese would never break the Navajo code. We were Marines, American Marines, and we fought to protect our families and defend the Navajo Nation. But most of all, we fought for our country, the United States of America.
As word of the attack on Pearl Harbor spread throughout the reservation, many Navajo reported to their agencies with shotguns and rifles in hand, ready to fight. Shortly after the United States was plunged into World War II, Philip Johnston, a civil engineer with the city of Los Angeles, conceived the idea of using the Navajo language as a military code on the battlefield. The son of missionaries, Johnston was raised on the Navajo reservation and spoke fluent Navajo.
He was a veteran of World War I. He was a lieutenant in the engineers in France. And he came back and worked for the city of Los Angeles as an engineer. As he told it to me, and as he's told it to other people, he heard on the radio about the problems with communication security, especially voice communications. And he knew that the Navajo language was unknown to maybe just a few people outside the Navajo tribe. Very few people.
Johnston proposed training Navajo Indians as communication specialists on the battlefield.
He got a couple of Navajos who were living in the Los Angeles area to go down to San Diego, and they set up a team of Marines who were signal people at the end of the field or wherever it was the trial was conducted. At one far end was this group of Navajos, or a Navajo on one radio at one end of the field and a Navajo on the other end of the field receiving. And also at the far end of the field was a group of Marines who had to take the message, encrypt it, and pass it to the people on the other end of the radio, the voice radio, who took down the message and had to decipher it. Well, there was no contest. I mean, the Navajos and the Marines were given the same messages, and the Navajos who received it translated it that much more quickly than could ever be believed.
Not nearly as many Americans spoke Japanese, and the enemy enjoyed a distinct advantage. By introducing coded Navajo, Johnston was confident that American units could send and receive radio and telephone messages without being understood by the Japanese. These specially trained Marines would speak coded Navajo on the battlefield. The code would be memorized, and the Navajo would send and receive messages quickly without the use of bulky decoding machines. This select and highly trained group of Navajos became known as code talkers.
In the Pacific, it was a whole different situation. Secure communications was always a problem. They needed to do something. The idea of carrying code books around and deciphering coded messages was always very difficult. This seemed to be the easiest way to get around that situation and still be able to establish secure communications, which were always necessary.
The use of American Indians as communication specialists in combat was not a new concept. During World War I, Choctaw Indians were used by the U.S. Army. But unlike the Choctaw, who used only a handful of code words from their language, Johnston planned a complex military code based on the Navajo language that would include over 200 battlefield terms. The Navajo have traditionally passed their language orally from one generation to the next. In 1910, the Franciscan priests of St. Michael's actually published the Ethnologic Dictionary of the Navajo language. At that time, only a handful of people outside the reservation, primarily anthropologists, missionaries, and traders, could speak Navajo. Johnston's proposal to General Thomas Holcomb, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, called for 200 Navajos for the Code Talker program. The Marine Corps reviewed Johnston's idea and responded by allowing approximately 30 Navajos to be trained in a classified pilot program. The Japanese juggernaut seemed all but invincible as island after island fell. Then came Midway. American naval cryptologists, led by Navy Commander Joseph J. Rochefort, had virtually broken JN-25, the main Japanese operational naval code. In April 1942, the Marine Corps began looking for a few good Navajo Indians in Arizona and New Mexico. They would serve as the first platoon of code talkers.
Once the idea was accepted by headquarters Marine Corps, once the authorization was given to recruit Navajos for the program, they didn't, just any Navajo was not enlisted or sworn in or recruited. You had to be fluent in English. He had to be able to speak English and understand English.
A friend of mine came in one evening. He said, you know, Carl, the Marine Corps was 30 Navajos for special duty. And I said, okay, let's join it. Maybe we'll get a nice job in Washington, D.C.
Because it was a classified program, the first recruits were not told that they were volunteering for special duty.
Never away from home, never rode a train in my lifetime. But that wasn't quite an experience because they put me on a train in Gallup,
A platoon of 29 Navajos was sent to boot camp at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, California.
We went through the boot camp real good, you know. We did everything that they told us to do.
It was simple. That's nothing, because I'm used to the hardship, you know, and a lot of endurance. That's the way I was raised. I was out in hollow water, run every morning, whether rain or shine or snow, whatever, you know. That was my family tradition.
In June 1942, the first group of Navajo Indians graduated from basic training.
They took us to the rifle range. The general that was running that boot camp there, he came around and said, "How do you made such a wonderful record? You made a high score. You made 97.3. So he was really proud of us. So he said, "How did you do that?" And one of the boys, he said, "Well, we got a lot of prairie dogs at home. We always practice on prairie dogs, shooting at them." So he said, "Well, I hope you'll do the same thing, shooting at the enemy."
After boot camp, the Navajos were sent to the newly established Navajo Communications School at Camp Elliott, also in San Diego. Here, they received training in basic military communications, including semaphore, Morse code, and radio transmission.
The training schedule consisted of 6 parts: printing and message writing, Navajo alphabet, the Navajo vocabulary, voice procedure, Navajo message transmission, and Fleet Marine Force organization.
The Navajos began the daunting task of assembling the code.
The Marines told us that they were going to use our language. So, but we didn't know how to start, so they told us how to start.
The platoon began identifying over 200 military and battlefield terms used most frequently in combat, such as battleship, ammunition, and attack. Because there were no equivalent or existing words in the Navajo language for these terms, the Navajos improvised. The code talkers assigned common Navajo words to the military and battlefield terms that they had identified. Many of the code words came directly from nature, primarily animals.
Short, you know, everything short. Just one word will explain a certain war material, which we did. And we tried it out in front of them. They said, "Gee, this is good, fast, and it looks like foolproof."
Submarine, for example, was called iron fish, or beshlo. Destroyer was called shark, or kalo. And a fighter plane was called hummingbird, or dahiti. The Navajos also assigned code words to each letter of the English alphabet. In order to use the island Guam in a message, the Navajos would spell it out, letter for letter. G, goat, klize. U, ute, no da'i. A, ant, wolachi. M, mouse, na'as onsa. The most commonly used consonants and vowels were assigned several code words. For example, the primary code word for the letter E was ear, or aja. The secondary code word was elk, or dze. The third code word was I, or ana in Navajo. By assigning several code words to the most common consonants and vowels, the Navajos reasoned that it would be difficult for the Japanese to establish any pattern in their voice communications, the basis for breaking a code. The Marine Corps went to great lengths to ensure that the Code Talker program and the code itself were kept secret.
They were very careful. They told us that you don't go on leave and go on liberty and tell your girl, what you're doing. Don't ever mention it.
As a way of testing the code, Navy cryptologists attempted to break it. After 3 days, they abandoned their efforts. Even Navajo recruits unfamiliar with the code could not understand it.
The important thing they stressed was that speed, the preciseness in sending and receiving. And so you work real hard at that.
This was not printed and it was not allowed to be brought forward to the front line. So they had to learn all these things and they had to memorize the whole code also. And that's what was unique about it.
At Camp Elliott, the Navajos trained intensely with several types of radios. They learned how to use walkie-talkies, field telephones, backpack radios, and the TBX radio. Maintenance and repair of their equipment was also stressed.
The Navajos used a variety of communications equipment, radios, field phones, that sort of thing. But this is the TBX. This is the workhorse of the field radios. The Army used it, the Navy used it, the Marine Corps used it. Anybody who needed a fairly portable means of communicating in the field, this was the real workhorse. And it had a limited range, but it was adequate to be able to contact ships, aircraft, or other ground units.
The TBX radio antenna was a spool of wire that was typically tacked onto palm trees or placed atop the mast of a ship. The 80-pound TBX could be powered both by batteries or by a hand-cranked generator.
Talk time with the batteries was limited. If you were in a position over a period of time, you obviously didn't want to waste batteries that you probably didn't have. So you'd use this hand-crank generator. And once you started generating like this and you had somebody energetic enough to be able to crank it, you could talk indefinitely. And this was the preferred method. Obviously batteries were hard to come by. A body to crank this thing was not as difficult to come by.
The first platoon of code talkers completed Navajo Communication School in late summer 1942.
I am bringing a distant nation against you. An ancient and enduring nation. A people whose language you do not know, whose speech you do not understand. Jeremiah 5, verse 15.
Philip Johnson sold them a bill of goods. He convinced them of things he didn't do. So it was very upsetting to the code talkers when they had that big celebration in Chicago and he's standing there with a big button that says, creator of the Navajo Code. There was almost a war that broke out because they were so insulted because he was not part of that program until much later. And even then, he only came in as an administrator. It's just that Brendan Tully didn't believe that, what we were telling him was true. He was preferring to believe other sources like Venus Frank from the Marine Corps Museum, Philip Johnson sold them a bill of goods. He convinced them of things he didn't do. He did not speak fluent Navajo. He had no clue. He did not create the code. He did not create one word of the code. He was incapable of it and didn't spend that much time speaking the language. And if you do not learn that language from birth, you never learn to speak it well. It's not, you can't take a Berlitz course or any kind of thing in conversational Navajo. They're trying to get to that point, but it's a language that has so many nuances, so many inflections and accents that if you put an accent in a different place of the word, it changes the entire meaning of the word. Most of the trader families that had lived on the reservation for generations spoke it very well. They could really converse with their Navajo tradespeople, their weavers, their sculptors, their potters. You know, they could deal with them on a very, very eloquent level. They were in schools. They were not very good schools, but they were in schools. They knew enough about this country to understand that Hawaii was at that time a territory, but it was under our protection. And they were also smart enough to figure out better to deal with the devil you know than one you don't. And an attack on Pearl Harbor meant an attack on this country. And you ask any Native American, the lengths that they would go to protect their land, their people. They were here first. They've got a lot longer history than we do. To them, they have more at stake. What they have may have been pared down by our terrible, terrible governments, but it's theirs. And they protect it. And they respect it. And they don't want anybody coming in here from outside this country telling them, you're next. You're going to be exterminated because you're not free, white, and 21. So they understood. There were many of them that served in World War I. Lots of Native Americans served in World War I, even when they didn't have the right to vote. They weren't even citizens of this country. But it's their land. It's where they live. It's their heritage. It's worth protecting. And that's how they felt. And when World War II was declared, they said, what do we do to help? What do you need us to do? We'll collect scrap metal. We'll use ration cards. Whatever you need us to do. This enemy needs to be defeated. So I don't think for many of them it was a difficult choice. We moved here in 1962, and it's kind of a funny little statistic. When we moved to Longmont in 1962, the population was 14,990. When we moved here with our 10-member family, the population went up to 15,000. So I went to the elementary school. The charter school on Main Street was turned into a junior high when they finished Longmont High. So I went to junior high school at that school and graduated from Longmont High School in 1968. But we lived here. We lived on 125 Vivian Street. We had 3.5 acres. We were a blended family. I had 3 stepbrothers and a stepsister, along with 2 natural sisters and a natural brother. And we raised chickens and pigs and tomatoes. And so my love for the earth came from that experience of growing our own food and tending chickens and collecting eggs every morning and that kind of thing. So Longmont was a small town, but it had such a good feel to it. It was a good place to grow up. I don't ever remember hearing about a murder or a break-in or someone, terrorizing businesses or anything like that. I mean, it was a good place to grow up. And frankly, to me, it still has that same 15,000 population feel to it. People are polite. People are helpful. It's managed to maintain that small town wonderful feel. So coming back here was a no-brainer. I wanted my child to grow up in Colorado. I was born in Colorado. I wanted her to experience, what it was like to grow up in Colorado. And yeah, I like Longmont. It's one of my favorite places in the world. A lot of fond memories. Good memories here. Good school, good teachers, good friends. It's been a happy place for me and my mom. And my granddaughter. I get to bring up my granddaughter 3 days of the week. So I was just too young to actually explore the town or anything, but she gets to play in a neighborhood that's safe, in a backyard that's safe. So it's I want her to have that experience of growing up in a really good town. I was active in the drama club, which helped with, presentations, because speaking in front of people can be very intimidating. It's scary to step out on that stage and see an audience out there and you're going, but I never had that. I was never afraid to stand up and speak with people. I was never intimidated by it. I guess a little bit of a ham. It never intimidated me. Because most of the time I had such a fascinating story to tell that it was almost an out-of-body experience. I was on the stage, but I wasn't really relating the story of the men. It was like I was able to talk for them. The story wasn't about me. Maybe if I had stand up there and talk for an hour about me, which you'd fall asleep, but that would not appeal to. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But talking about the Code Talkers or doing my original oratory in high school, yeah, because it was about someone else. So yeah, I guess in a way, doing the drama club in high school did prepare me for the presentations that I do on the Navajo Code Talkers. Yeah, it was invaluable looking back. Yeah, it was fun too. You get on a bus, you travel out, don't have a curfew. You got home when the bus brought you back to the parking lot. It's like, it's okay to be out past 10 on a school night. It was whatever. But yeah. Oh, I mean, I was a Trojanette, then I was a head pom, and I belonged to the drama club, Strassman. She was a wonderful teacher. We did some wonderful plays, wonderful stuff, through, and I was on what they call the circuit, the high school circuit, where I did original oratory, and we would travel around to high schools, all the way up to Wyoming and stuff, and give our presentations. And if it was really good, you won a trophy, which I got a few of. But it was a wonderful, wonderful. We had great teachers. We really did. I can't remember a bad experience with a teacher, in junior high or Longmont High. Grade school was a little different, but yeah. I mean, we had great activities, we had great athletes, good organizations, I just remember being happy. I was on the Reggie Bat Swim Club, during the summer, and with Dorothy Stromquist and the Shepherd twins and the Henry girls. I mean, we travel around and do all these swim meets, and it was a good upbringing. It really was. I don't remember many kids getting in trouble over the summer. Because, I mean, when I wasn't on the swim team, I worked. I worked at Hamburger Haven, the drive-in on Main Street. There were 10 of us in the family. There wasn't a lot of money to go around. If I wanted something extra, I got a job. But I loved those summers at Hamburger Haven. I mean, they were fun. It was just really sad that there's no drive-ins. Can we bring back Hamburger Haven? Bring back the drive-ins, There was the A&W, Hamburger Haven, and the Black Angus. Those were the three that everybody went up and down Main Street on Friday and Saturday nights to buy the burgers and listen to the music and drag Maine, which you can't do anymore. There's no cruising. It's like, seriously, come on. What's wrong with cruising? But it was I always felt safe growing up here. I don't think I ever worried about walking to and from school. I never worried about working at Hamburger Haven. Never worried about anybody ever robbing us or, accosting us, or it was just, Longmont was a good town. Just bring back the drive-ins. Then we can get on diners, drive-ins, and dives, We can have Guy Fieri come back and do a traditional drive-in here in Longmont. That would be a gas. That would be fun.